Hey everyone, welcome to Module 3's mini lecture. In this lecture, we're going to talk about food systems and environmental degradation, and also some alternatives to the current food system. So, human use of ecology is specifically with the food system is seriously out of balance with the protection of ecological integrity. We read this in the Anderson article. So, for example, agricultural practices account for about 30% of the anthropogenic human-made greenhouse gas emissions, influencing climate change, for example. And climate change has serious health consequences that are endured by poor populations, both domestically. Hey everyone, welcome to Module 3 mini lecture on food systems and environmental degradation. We're going to go through the main environmental impacts from the food system and also talk a little bit about alternatives to the modern industrial food system. So human use of the ecosystem, particularly the way that we grow food, is seriously out of balance with the protection of ecological integrity. We read this in the Anderson article from this week. And for example, agricultural practices account for about 30% of the anthropogenic human-made greenhouse gas emissions influencing climate change. So climate change causes health consequences that are usually endured by poor populations, both domestically and globally, particularly in the global south. So thus increases in severe weather patterns, flooding, and droughts have catastrophic influences on the food supply and security, as well as like structural and economic damages caused by such disasters. And we saw this when Hurricane Katrina happened. So even though there are a lot of environmental and health consequences that are caused by environmental degradation and the food system, we read this week in all of the readings that the food system is both a poison, so to speak, and it's also an antidote. In that it is causing environmental and human health problems, but the food system and in its alternative forms can generate healthy ecosystems and healthy populations. Let's examine a few of the environmental impacts of agriculture. So this list is not intended to be exhaustive, but I did want to bring a visual list to you of the environmental impacts of agriculture. So as many of you know, climate change is definitely at the top of the list, and agricultural practices release greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide and methane and nitrous oxide, and the use of fossil fuels, as well as greenhouse gases released in practices related to the production and transportation of food in the food system. So there's also soil degradation and the soil fertility that is going down, so the loss of soil quality and nutrients from agricultural practices. So, for example, synthetic fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides, as well as like little to no fallow time for fields, and monocropping and plowing all cause serious soil degradation, which is a problem, and many scientists worry about soil quality and our food system and the sustainability of the soil to be able to grow foods. So then there's also irrigation, so the overuse of water irrigation. So this is depleting underground aquifers, and water pollution from the contaminated runoff is a huge issue. We have genetic engineering of seeds, so this causes the production of super weeds and encourages the need for even more herbicides and pesticides. Another huge environmental impact from agriculture is deforestation, so clearing the forests and wetlands and other wild areas for agricultural purposes. And oftentimes this is related to luxury goods like beef and sugars, coffees, and teas. Here down on the list, but a huge problem, is oceans and overfishing. So water quality loss from fishing practices. We also know about bioaccumulation in fish and from polluted waters, and then also the loss of fishing stocks. Another important influence is that about 30 to 40% of greenhouse gases are absorbed by rivers and lakes and the ocean, and this is causing acidification and also disrupts the ocean's food chain. So then lastly, on this list is pollutants, and we know that synthetic pesticides are harmful to the soil, to water, to humans, to wildlife. And then there's also air quality issues from concentrated animal feed operations. So again, this list is not intended to be exhaustive, but it does offer you some of the leading causes of some of the leading environmental impacts from our current agricultural system. So there are alternatives, which we're going to talk about in just a second. But I did want to highlight from the Leahy reading that you had this notion of capitalism and environmental problems. So the way that our modern food system is constructed is really formed and shaped by capitalism. And so I wanted to highlight just some of the things that we read about that are really driving the industrial food system as we know it. So social decisions about how to use non-human nature are generally made by the markets, and this creates a mismatch between what is profitable and what is sustainable. So Leahy argues that there's little hope in political regulation. Now, this article, while it still has a lot of really good information in it, I wonder if you think that this is true or not, that there's little hope in political regulation. I think Leahy is trying to argue that politics and the economy are tied together, and so alternative food systems or alternative food system models are going to have to come outside of politics, but I would welcome a critique of that. So then also an important thing to recognize in a capitalist food system is that often it's argued that the future is discounted. So ecological damage that increase profits now are actually expensive in the long run. And thinking about the food system and how efficient and cheap we can make food, while it may in the current moment seem to make sense, it really is not logical and sustainable in the long run. So then lastly here, there is this argument that capitalism creates growth and depends on growth. In environmental sociology, we call this the treadmill of production. And it really is argued that it's just simply not sustainable, particularly when we're talking about the food system. So competition seeks to cut costs with technological efficiency. For example, in precision farming, and a lot of farming practices on large-scale farms are really about how to cut costs and do it efficiently. But again, how sustainable is this? And then increase in the use of raw materials and waste causes big environmental issues. So capitalism, capitalism is at the base of kind of forming and shaping our industrial food system. But there are a lot of alternatives, as you read about this week. So we know from the Leahy article that there are models like gift economies that try and lean away from capitalism and think about other means of exchange. So can we use our labor or barter and offer gifts instead of only exchanging money? There's also this concept of hybrid models in hybrid kind of capitalist gift economies. And they're really certainly very interesting models that have been proposed as alternatives to kind of the capitalist food system. We also know that there's models in practice such as permacultures and agroforestry. So the Tonesmeyer piece argued for agroforestry. So these are systems of permanent agriculture that share many features of the forest, and there's a lot of promising outcomes related to these models. There's also community-supported agriculture, which have gotten increasingly popular, particularly in states like Vermont, where organic farmers offer up shares of their food, and that's supported by community members who buy the harvest from that season in terms of the fruits and vegetables and meat that a farmer is producing, and then gives back to the local community who buy shares. And then also I wanted to highlight that Anderson writes about small scale cropping and fishing for subsistence, for family needs only, and articulates that at least 70% of the global food production is really in the form of small scale subsistence farming. This is not the case in developed countries like the U.S., who are really reliant on the industrial food system and from imports of food. But in a lot of countries, people are growing food for their own needs, and so thinking about how can we increase small scale cropping and fishing for subsistence, and increase homegrown foods where we can. So although the food system is causing catastrophic environmental degradation and ecosystem degradation, which influences human health, there are a lot of really exciting models and propositions and alternatives that have been proposed to the modern food system.